Hello, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this evening's session on Are You Ready for the Next Breach? So, my name is Sujit Christie, the president of ISC Squared Colombo chapter. We welcome all of you for this session. And a few housekeeping rules. Those of you who'd like to have your CPs awarded to you, please ensure that your names are very correctly stated in your Zoom display so that it's easier for us to track and issue your CPs, number one. Number two, we have a guest speaker. He will go through the presentation probably about 45 minutes to 50 minutes is what we estimate for his presentation to take. And thereafter, we will engage in a discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Muhammad Abul Kalam Azad. He's a CISSP, a very prominent personality in Bangladesh. He's head of IT security and compliance of Eastern Bank Limited. Abul Azad, thank you so much for taking time for being with us today. So I herewith hand over the sessions to you. Over to you, Azad.
Thank you, Sujit, especially inviting me for this session. And thanks for joining everybody. I see Colombo chapter member and who are yet to be member. I'm a member for ISC Dhaka chapter. Myself, Abul Kalam Azad, head of information security. Already Sujit told me. And apart from that, I am a secretary of ISACA Dhaka chapter, and I'm a member of ISC Dhaka chapter. I achieved CISS for 2020, but I working for cyber security for last around 12 or 13 years. At 2010, I achieved CISA, then CISM, CRIX. After that, I think CISB should be a very good certification. I achieved that certification. So I usually speak to different conference, webinar across the world, and it's my pleasure to speak with you and to introduce each other. And definitely, if whoever you will be interested, you can also speak to our Dhaka ISC Square Dhaka chapter or ISACA Dhaka chapter or any other event in Dhaka. As we are now in a virtual, so it is very convenient to speak to any conference or any event. So let me start the presentation. And today I will discuss especially regarding the security breach. Let me share the slide first. I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation based on security breach, like whatever preparedness we should have to mitigate the security breach and what we should do during the security breach is the main concern for today's discussion. So I will focus on how is security breach happen, what are our preparation should we have, and what should we do during the security breach or during the mitigation of this breach, and what we should not do. Like we always get panicked, all these things. So what we should prepare. And after the presentation, there is a very few models to assess the preparedness for organization regarding the security breach. I will present one model. This is from TEST UK. So I think based on this model, you can get quite few idea how can you assess your preparedness regarding the security breach. So without any further discussion, let's jump into the presentation. We all know about incident response or what is incidents, like when the security breach happened. Ideally, incidents is something which we don't expect usually. What it is means that is unexpected thing. Like every day we start the system, like we run the server, but in some days we suddenly server became unable, server become shut down, or network device become unable, or network device become shut down. Is an incident. So what is the incident response? Now, if we face incident, then we have to give some response. We have to mitigate this, or either we have to report this to senior manager. Is the mechanism or process to identify the incident and finally mitigate or remove the incident is the incident response. For incident response, there are several frameworks. Mainly two frameworks is widely used. One is NIST and another is from SENSE. But both the framework has the common steps, but SENSE has a little bit wider. Is break number 3 point into several points. So let's go one by one. NIST incident response process, the first stage is the preparation. Like for incident response, how do we prepare by ourselves? Whatever tools and whatever mechanism we should have in place, whatever policy, process, whatever people we should have is the preparation phase. Like we always can think, or everybody should expect that some days we'll face some incidents. Definitely it will happen, maybe today or maybe after 1 year. But for that we should have the preparation. So in that preparation stage, whatever technology or process, whatever people is required, we'll discuss on this thing. Then second stage is the detection and analysis. After any incident, we need to detect this properly, especially the root cause, and we have to analyze what happened actually, how it's happened, who are the adversary, what are the media. All this we have to analyze. Based on the analysis, we can mitigate. If we cannot identify the incident properly, then it will be difficult to mitigate. Maintenance, we face one server down, but if we analyze properly, then we may find that there are several servers or 10 server has been compromised. But that's why analysis is important and proper detection. Then third phase is contamination and eradication and recovery. Contamination means after an incident, we have to stop the spreading, means stop the bleeding. And eradication, while this explain further details in the next couple of slides. And next final stage is post incident activity. Like after the incident, we have mitigated. From the incident, we have something to learn. We have some reactive action such that recurrence can be stopped. All this activity comes under the post incident activity. So SENSE also have the similar process, but it has break into contamination and into two parts, like contaminant and recovery. And post incident activity, they mention as a lesson learned. Means post incident we actually learn the lesson, and accordingly we try to do in future. So let's get into quite deeper into the presentation and how actually incident response work. First stage is preparation, like we have to prepare. That stage is called steady state. After the steady state, definitely we go for identification if any incident happen. If we can identify an incident, then we'll declare as an incident. After proper identification, we declare as an incident. Then it's a time for contamination. Means we like to stop this spreading. If we found two server is affected, we'll disconnect this server from the network. We'll try to stop the bleeding to network or stop the bleeding to across our infrastructure. Then the process is start cleanup. We'll start cleanup whatever happened. If it is malware affected, we'll try to remove malware, or we'll do other necessary action. That stage is called recovery. After the recovery, it goes to the production again, and from here we learn something, and from this lesson we try to implement in future. And in that stage, there is a certain stage that we may jump back also, like from the recovery stage. After recovery, we find that everything is not recovered. We may that time jump back to contamination stage or identification stage. That process run sometimes directly, sometimes it can also go jump back also. So that's how it works, incident response process. So now let's think what actually we should do during the preparation phase. First activity is that train the team who will actually work for prevent the data breach or any security breach. we have to train them properly, because without sharp weapon we cannot do anything. So in that case, we can do scenario based training, like especially one scenario can be ransomware attack. We often face this type of attack. What actually to do for after an ransomware attack, what they should do in that particular scenario, we can conduct that type of training. We can deploy internal honeypot into our network, and we can see what type of threat is coming to this honeypot, and based on the data we can train our team. So that two scenarios very effective for preparation to train the team. Then we can do the conduct war games, like penetration testing. One red team, one blue team, and one purple team. Red team will try to hack the system, and blue team will try to protect the system from the penetration. So that war game can be happen in the organization, so that employee can know best of their things. And obviously, we have to maintain very good relationship between the different team of the IT infrastructure, like LBX, system admin team, network admin team. So that relationship should be cultivated across the system and across the organization. So by this time, if you have any question or any query on this, you can write into chat box, or you can throw to me. I'll be happy to answer. Is it okay, Sujit, or after the session they will directly throw all the questions?
No, I mean, they can either type the questions in the chat box, or they can, ask you the questions after you finish the presentation.
Okay, fine.
Both are acceptable.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Identification phase is most critical phase. If you cannot properly identify, we cannot mitigate. So what we have to do in that phase, we have to be willingful to identify each and everything. Means we have to do details analysis. And sometimes IT technical people get afraid to declare incidents. Like if once we got some incident, we always try to keep it under carpet. Like we don't want to declare. We always stop to let know senior management. But it is not that good practice. But if we cannot declare incident properly, then it cannot mitigate exactly. So we have to follow the organization policy. What is the incident? What threshold it should go to the incident? After what threshold it should be declared? So every organization has certain policy. We have to follow that policy, and we have to maintain the situation awareness. In what situation, how to declare, what to declare, all these things we have to, every team member should be very aware. Then provide current intelligence. We all should have the current intelligence, threat intelligence. I'm talking about. There are lots of threat intelligence available in the market. Lots of open source, many are commercial threat intelligence available. We all have. We should at least subscribe to threat intelligence so that we can know the latest IOC, latest iOS, all these things. And sometimes we get some information in the market that certain organization has been hacked, certain types of malware is coming. So for that, we have to take market information also and correlate the information in our organization and other market information. That will help everybody to identify the threat properly. And definitely, we have to assign primary handler. Every incident should be handled by certain team, but there should be some responsible person who is the main person or the primary person. So otherwise, every team will do their work at this stage, and there will be lack of coordination. After will not get a good result. And definitely in the incident, we have to control the flow of information. Like if we provide more information, sometimes it can be damage for the organization, or if we provide less information to other team, then they cannot identify or mitigate. So definitely we have to control this information. We have to know very well what information we need to provide and what information we should stop. That was the detection phase, and this stage is contamination. Means we have to contaminate. The main goal is that stop the bleeding. Like if we face anything, then we have to stop. We have to contaminate it. Like as COVID, we have seen that scenario during the COVID. If one body become COVID affected, then we isolate him for certain time, such that that COVID virus does not spread across other body. So that is the main goal of contaminant. So if we want find one system is affected, we have to disconnect this system, or we have to shut down based on our organization or based on the scenario, such that it does not spread the malware or any the thing. So that is the something like isolation or contamination. And one we can also contaminate, or that we can, if large group of system or large number of system being affected, we can subgroup that thing, like network device one group, system one group, and we can contaminate in group by group. So that is helpful for real recovery and all these things. In that stage, we have to recover the system to its original stage. Like we have to eradicate the whatever the infection. Like if I get infected by virus, we have to remove this virus. If I affected by malware, we have to remove this malware. So here, after stopping the bleeding, I or C incident responder need to eradicate the problem. So if it become affected by malware, we have to work to remove the malware, or if become hardware failure, maybe we have to replace the hardware, and we have to definitely do the analysis what else other is affected by this type of cause. Actually, these are the recovery final stage to get the normal system. In that stage, we'll recover from the affection. If recovery is not possible, then we have to replace by a new system. But in that stage, we have to be very careful whether we are recovering to the original state, and definitely time slot requirement for that particular recovery is very important, and that is depends on the efficiency, and that's actually show the efficiency of the incident response team. And this is the last stage after the incident security breach recovery. That is the lesson learned. For particular lesson, we definitely learn something. Like a ransomware attack, we learn something. What we learn? That backup is the most effective strategy in that ransomware attack, because from every ransomware attack is not guaranteed that we can recover. Even after paying the ransom, it is not guaranteed that we'll retrieve the key or we can retrieve the system. So backup is the most effective, and especially the offline backup. That is the lesson learned. So in that case scenario, we learn some lesson for every particular case or group of case, and in using that lesson, using this knowledge, we'll try to implement in near future such that organization can survive for that particular issue or particular scenario security breach. So lesson learned, or we can say knowledge sharing, is the most critical part we actually achieve from the incident. There are certain tips for building an effective incident response team. What I primarily identified 7 tips. First of all is establish an incident response team. We can establish an official incident response team, but every organization have their incident response team, but they mostly they work ad hoc basis. There is no formal lack of formal incident response team. Every organization should formally declare an incident response team. So responsibility and accountability goes to that team, and they will be aware their responsibility and accountability. Then conduct regular threat analysis. They can do the threat analysis at regular interval, so that their knowledge will be increased. Outline quick response guideline. Some quick response guideline can be developed such that they can refer this guideline at the time of incident. Develop procedures for external communication. During incident, how the external communication will go, how they will communicate external team, that can be processed down, and that can be diagnosed, and we need to train the team. This is the critical part, train the team. All this activity actually train the team, and obviously you can do some incident response test, at least annually we should do. Like we do beer drill, for fire drill, all these things. So similarly, we can do incident response drill annually, or cyber drill. Somebody call it cyber drill also. So we can do that type of drill annually. So it will give better understanding to the incident response team across all organizations. And people should have the mind to learn every day from their response, from their problem, all these things. So that will make a team more effective. So this is some case study, like incident for ransomware attack. What actually we do in the case of ransomware, and it is going very high, and every organization or every country nowadays facing lots of incidents regarding the ransomware. So that's why I bring in as a case study. So in case of ransomware attack, it's the incident. What step actually we have to do? So give you audience a quite idea about. So in that case, for immediately we'll disconnect the infected computer laptop. This is something stopping the bleeding, like isolation. We'll consider turning off Wi-Fi and other thing, network device, which is not really important or is required at this moment. That also stop the bleeding or eradicate, like isolate. Then what we have to do? Immediately reset credential, password, all these things, OTP for other system which is not still affected, because ransomware, they actually work with the credential, they encrypted the system. If we can change the password, that will definitely make them delay to encrypt other system. And finally, we can do safely wipe the infected device and reinstall the OS. We can wipe out and reinstall the OS. That are the some steps for incident response, what we actually do. But what we have to consider few more things, like before restore from backup, we have to verify the backup is free from malware. That is good, important. Like if the backup is affected by malware, then after restoring, it may spread again. Then we have to consider connect device to clean network. So if we found that network device also affected, we have to replace this network and by clean device. And install, update, and run antivirus solution. Reconnect, and finally at the go live stage, we have to reconnect our network. And after doing this thing, we have to monitor definitely network traffic using different tools and technology for certain times. Like maybe why we can recover from one incident, but there may be some other malware hide in our network. They may spread or they may become activated after certain. So after that incident, we have to monitor the network traffic for certain times. Here is another example for email, like at 3 p.m. That is for phishing email. What actually will do? At 3 p.m., IT service desk received 5 report for emailer regarding email that 42 employee across department, they received some sort of spam mail. And that mail asks for username, password, like phishing mail. In that phishing mail, the attacker asks for email and username and password. What actually that should be do? Now let's consider this incident. What is the incidency rate? How do you think incidency rate is it low? That is the question first we have to ask to the incident response team. After receiving this type of notice, we usually got lots of phishing mail, spam mail, and that mail asks for user ID, password, sometimes asks for reset your bank account, reset your bank account PIN, all these things. So if that type of incident to be reported to incident response team, after reporting, incident response team should think that question definitely. They have to consider the severity of that incident. They immediately take some action, something definitely identification. Who is the responsible for this action? How it comes to the network? What are the source of that type of email? This definitely should do analysis such that they can identify the root cause. And there should be some process like how they notify to organizational leadership, top management, that type of phishing mail is coming to aware all employees, and how they will communicate internally and externally if required. So that type of question they should come in mind, incident response team, and they should ask. Then in the process, in the preparation stage, there should be clear guideline regarding if any security breach or incident happen, how they will respond to the incident. So I'm skipping this slide. So we'll face security breach every day. Lots of cyber attack is going in different organizations. So what ideally we should consider? We have to think certain issue. Like, does your team have an offline disaster recovery plan? Whether we have an offline fully disaster recovery plan, that is important. Do you have a cybersecurity strategic plan? Again, if we don't have very good cybersecurity strategy plan, then we cannot recover this type of incident. Whether we have cybersecurity policy, and definitely we do conduct internal security meeting, security awareness training, and incident response plan or incident response team. All these things we have to consider very carefully. So there is some from different incident, different idea. We have to follow certain guideline. That's the dose for incident response. So first thing is we have to use forensic tools to collect volatile data, because after the incident, everybody shut down, maximum, not everybody, maximum people shut down the system. In that case, volatile data, we lost the volatile data like memory data. But most of the incident malware can be found from the volatile data like memory. So we have to have certain forensic tool which collect volatile data, and we have to collect volatile data. We have to collect external IOC such that we can correlate internal IOC and external IOC. We can identify the source. Secure system and other media. After the incident, we have to secure the system and media for forensic. After forensic only, we can identify the source. That is the important. We have to preserve appropriate log for network device and system. And communication, this is the most important part. We have to communication promptly with potential customer and properly, such that it does not create panic, but it gives the awareness to the appropriate stakeholder. Few don'ts. What usually people do, don't panic. It makes things worse. If we get panic, thing will be worse. So we should not be panic. We should not shut down compromised system immediately. We can disconnect from the network, but shutting down it will actually lose the volatile data. Don't discuss the incident with other unless otherwise directed. We should not discuss incident to who are not really stakeholder. These are the some doors. Don't use domain admin credential to access the system environment. Don't access any non-forensic software on compromised system. So these are the few things we can follow, such that we cannot get panic, we can recover the system in time, and we effectively manage the incident. This is the some reference from used for this presentation. If anybody need to know more about that, you can refer that thing sense and CSC UK CISA steals them. You'll get more information regarding that. This is the simple presentation from my side. Now, let me show the tools, which actually is a framework developed by Crest UK. This give you good idea or understanding regarding your preparedness against standard, what actually we should have and whatever our preparedness. So this tool is free to use, anybody can use. So in that tool, there are almost 25 control. what we have to do for each control, we have to do the self-assessment. Like first, there are 5 phase. One is preparation, second phase is response, third phase is follow-up. In that mainly 3 phase. In the 3 phase, they describe put all the control into the 3 phase. Like conduct critical assessment for evaluation. We have to establish our target achievement here. How we like to go. Like we select our target achievement is the highest level. In that configuration, this is part is configuration. We can configure what is our target. This is the target for all control. We have select their target. Now in that step, we will get the assessment. We have set our assess target, and now it is the self-assessment. In self-assessment, about 20 plus questionnaire. First is conduct a critical assessment for your organization. Whether we are conducting self-assessment, critical self-assessment for our organization. How is our stage? Is it initial stage? Means we are doing ad hoc basis. Is it established stage? Means we are doing at regular interval. Is it business enabler? Like a business really accept this thing. Quantitatively managed. Can we manage this assessment in quantitatively? And this is the final stage, optimized. Or we can also mention the answer, don't know, not applicable, question not selected. So we all know about the CMMI, something like that. CMMI, highest level of maturity. Like we select, this is 3. Carry out a cybersecurity threat analysis. We have to respond. I will not select for all, but for showing you the result, I am randomly selecting few. After doing self-assessment regarding the maturity of the organization, then we have to click on the result tab. Here you will get something like that. Here is different control. You can see 1.1 critically assessment. Our target is 5, but our current stage is 3. Means we have to go that much. Threat analysis. Our target is 5, but our present stage is 3. People, process, and technology. Our target is 5. Our present status is 3. This maturity assessment. Our target 5, but our current stage is very low, 3. And if we fill all the questionnaire by doing self-assessment, we'll get a good graph. And from that framework, we can see how our maturity is. I'm selecting few more. You can see in that stage how is our presentation, how is our current status. So this really gives, especially to me, very good idea regarding my preparedness regarding cyber breach handling or security breach handling or incident response. And everybody can think about that control. This control under preparation, what is the control, response, the identification, investigation, action, control, and follow up the control. So that will give you also a good idea about your organization preparedness, and we can work towards achieve our target as per our organization goal. So that will give you a good understanding regarding security breach preparation. So that's all from my part. So now I am giving the floor for question answer.
Thank you, Azad, for the presentation. I think there are lots of valuable inputs which you have shared here. You talked briefly about the CREST, and then you spoke about the incident management framework, both from NIST and SANS. So you set the stage, and I think there are a few audience questions. So we'll start with the audience questions, and then we will take the rest of it on the fly. Right. So the first question I'd like to post for you is, one person who has, there's a question from Lokendra, right? Who declared the incident? Who declares the incident? I think that should be the correct way of asking you. Who should declare the incident? Who should activate the incident response team? Azad, if you
Yeah,
can
very good
take,
question.
yes,
Yeah,
and
very
may I
good.
also request you to stop sharing the screen, please?
Sure.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, very good question. And really, it's actually defined in the organization incident response policy. And sometimes in every organization, there is no hard rule like that this person should declare. But as per organization, they can mention who will declare the incident response, who will activate the incident response. Usually situation in Bangladesh and other countries, we found that actually head of IT or CTO declare the incident, and he is the in charge to make the activate of this incident response team. But other situation can be also acceptable, but that should be very well documented in the incident response policy and procedure, like who will declaring the incident and who will activate the incident response team and who will be the member for incident response team. So as in my area practice, every bank in Bangladesh is run by Central Bank of Bangladesh. So as per Bangladesh Bank guideline, there is some guidelines regarding incident response team. So as per our guideline, CTO declare as an incident and CTO activate the incident response. But other CTO is also available in our multinational country, like there is CISO. CISO actually declare the incident and he also activate. In small organization, even I found that CEO also declare as an incident and he activate the incident. So any situation is acceptable, but it should be well documented and it should be approved by the senior manager.
Excellent response, Azad. I think what you're actually bringing out here is that there is no hard and fast rule, but whoever you decide should be the person made accountable, responsible. That should be clearly documented and of course be used as part of your incident response training drills and various exercises as well, so that they know that at that point in time when there is an incident to be declared, they are aware what they need to do. And in the similar lines, even the person who is supposed to declare incident response, he or she is aware of what they need to do. Right. Then there's also another question which is pertaining to tool, right? And this question again is from Lokendra. It says, can you recommend an open source Honeypot system? I'm not sure whether it is relevant to today's topic, but if you have any thoughts, you can suggest. Otherwise, we can skip the question and take a different one.
Yeah, somewhat relevant. I mentioned in the presentation that Honeypot, but at this moment I cannot remember. I used one or two honey open source, but I cannot remember the name. But I can push you through. You will get few open source Honeypot. I can push you further after the meeting, after the presentation.
So there's another question, right? And this question comes from Dimutu, right? He is asking, if I were to literally read his question, is it required to appoint a spokesperson? And I assume he is referring to communication with external parties.
Yeah. That's
Go
a
ahead.
good. That's good part that if you can appoint a spokesperson. But for the small organization, they usually cannot appoint a dedicated spokesperson, but they give additional responsibility apart from his day-to-day activity. Like if an incident happened for external communication, this person will communicate with the external party, and he will communicate with media, and he will communicate internally. But for bigger organization, I found many of bigger organization, they have a spokesperson, dedicated spokesperson. After incident, they speak to media, they contact with internal and external store, and they also have legal retainer. They will contact with law enforcement agency. So there may be certain spokesperson also in big organization, but in the small organization that can be done by giving responsibility to some person who has some other activity also. That way it can be worked.
So what you're saying is, it is important to define who should be the spokesperson. In other words, not everybody can speak to external parties.
Definitely, exactly.
So that has to be predetermined. And also there has to be a script, right? So they don't speak what comes to their mind, but it is a predefined script which they read out. Right? But in the initial stages, they may not know much about the incident. Probably they need to say, okay, we are investigating, we will look into the matter and come back, and so on and so forth. So gradually, you need to break the news. So same way, you also need to have a spokesperson who will communicate to the internal people as well, that is the staff within the organization. And in some cases, there has to be a person also who communicates with the loved ones, the family members. Right? So both internal, external communications have to be thought through and documented. Right? So there's some more questions. And this time, this question comes from Roshan. Right? Roshan's asking, how to manage when systems are offline for forensics data collection analysis, which might take long hours? Can you have backup servers, etc., or how to justify such additional cost for such backup and DR? Multiple questions here, right? I'm not sure what the context here is. Of course, I understand there is an incident, and if we are to do incident analysis or forensics analysis, then you definitely need to have an offline image of those systems. Azad, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thanks for giving some thoughts. Definitely, I'm answering the second one. Definitely, there is lots of justification for taking backup and DR because we always do investment based on cost benefit analysis. If losing of data, losing of business is less than the cost of backup, definitely business will not take backup or they will not develop their set. But losing of the data, losing of business is higher the cost of backup and there, then business will definitely should think about backup and they should appropriately do the backup and their side. And so this is very important and justified by the business actually, whether we should take backup on this. And apart from cost, there are certain rules and regulation also. Every organization is regulated by certain regulator, financial organization by central bank and government. So for doing some business also, they have to do certain type of backup and their side. There is also regulation for every organization there, and international law and regulation also, we cannot lose data for many cases unless they are specifically mentioned. So that is very justified for backup and recovery. And for the first question, how do we collect offline data for forensic, like the system which is offline? For that case, we have to collect data, like we have to go to the system and we have to collect data from the system itself. We cannot use network, or I cannot use internet to collect forensic data from that system. We have to go physically near to the system and we have to connect that device to forensic tools, and using that forensic tool, we have to collect forensic data. I guess this fulfill the questions.
Yes, sir. And I think we are in interesting times, right? So today organizations are in a hybrid environment, right? Some systems are on-prem, some systems are in the cloud. So what people need to take note is that these things should be taken as in the initial stage of the incident response planning itself. Right, it cannot be an afterthought. You cannot have an incident and then you decide you've got to do forensics, or you cannot then go for CapEx, because there will be very little time. So some of these things will have to be pre-planned. And more importantly, if at all you're going to have a breach in a system which is hosted in the cloud, you've got to think through that process as well. Azad, anything you want to add to what I just mentioned?
You give a very good example. So I don't think anything I need to explain more, because everything is very clear from that example. So everybody will understand why actually requirement and come. So that's a good thing.
So, Asad, I mean, I just want to walk you through to a different area, right? Now, all of us talk about an incident response plan. How practical this is to simulate an incident response? What are your experiences?
Yeah, it's a really difficult area. Everybody speak about incident response plan, cyber security response plan, but in practice, whenever we face incidents, we feel lots of practice and lots of experience everybody should have. Otherwise, really difficult to implement that plan. But we plan some way, but always we found that some component is missing from that plan. We all think about ransomware, we think about virus attack, we think about offline backup, but in real scenario, when incident happened, we think that the component is really missing. We never thought that thing. So always it come from other side. But well, it's still good that we having some plan and going it day by day and give it maturity day by day. Otherwise, if we don't have anything, we really know what will be going mess up. But really in practice, it's really very difficult, and everything cannot manage by this plan. That time really experience and some sort of practical knowledge really help to recover from the incident.
Absolutely, absolutely. So may I also request Vidit, Roshan, Lokendra, Alam, Kapila, Shadi, then of course, Dimatu, if you do have any questions, you can unmute, turn on the camera, ask the questions directly to Azad or even to myself. We're more than happy to take those questions. Vidit, Roshan, any more questions from you? Let me see, there's some questions which have come up, right? Okay, Lokendra has again come up with another question. The primary handler is one who leads the IR team. He has raised a question there. Service desk manager or sysadmin? Do we need to include forensics professionals and lawsuits in the IR team? Multiple questions. So if I were to understand this question, who is the primary incident handler in the incident management team? Alam? I mean, sorry, Azad?
Yeah. Good question or few question, but it should not be the always that primary incident handler should be the incident response team lead. He can lead the team, but primary he can give the responsibility to someone else also. Primary handler as a primary handler, that can be happen. But again, the team lead can be the primary responsible person also. And your last question, like forensic professional and lawsuit in incident response team, whether we should include them in the incident. It is good to include, and because every incident may have some legal impact also, and every incident response team requires some forensic skill set. So it is very good to include forensic and lawsuit personnel. And even the service decks and system admin, they can be also part of incident response team, because after incident, service level and system level, lots of requirement is there, so they can be also part of incident response team. So ideally, if we think about the incident response team, this is a mixed type of team, may have many diverse background of people, like spokesman who is expert in communication, who is expert in legal, so forensic, so all can be the part of incident with no problem.
So my thought, Lokendra, for your question is, it depends on the team size. and what you're actually trying to achieve. If you're a part of a large organization, a large bank or a multinational, then I think you will have different teams doing different functions. But if you're a small team, it'll be one of the same person who is going to do this work. But always try and work through preventive controls and detective controls as much as possible than to do a forensics after an incident. Because postmortem analysis is going to be very, very expensive. And if you're a regulated organization, the regulator will impose penalties as well. So you have cost of forensics, cost of investigation, cost of preventing or managing the brand damage. And then, of course, you also have to spend for the investigation, right? So that's one aspect of it. The second one is that you need to continuously monitor your systems, right? Today we don't talk about controls alone. We always say assume breach. In other words, do threat hunting. Can you find the perpetrator as quickly as possible? On an average, the perpetrators have been living on the networks for about 300 to 400 days. So can we find them much faster before damage is done? Right. So let's see. There is one more question, I guess. So Alam has asked this question. In case of ransomware, what series of tasks IR team needs to perform?
Okay. In the presentation, we have shown like for ransomware, what tasks need to, first of all, they have to detect, identify the system which was affected by the ransomware, then definitely disconnect the system from the network such that we can stop this spreading. And then next stage is recovery. We'll have to try to recover from either from removing the malware or ransomware, or if we cannot recover from the affected system, we have to reinstall and OS database application, all these things. And then after installation, we have to install antivirus, all that preventive control, and finally connect to the network device. That's the typical way. But issue is that in that process, recovery, which is the most difficult. If we don't have proper backup, then it will be very difficult to recover, because paying the ransom doesn't guarantee that you will get the key. And again, there are lots of ransomware, even breaking them and getting keys is always not successful. So that's the issue.
So again, right, my thoughts to what Alam asked, right, in addition to what Azad mentioned, try and focus on your preventive controls as much as possible, right? Look at how do you protect your identities? How do you protect your endpoints? Look at every aspect which can be breached. Right? Can a phishing email cause a damage? Or can somebody clicking on a link cause damage? Or can somebody clicking on a link which is on the internet cause damage? Look at cause and effect. Implement those controls. We have two sets of identities. One is the regular identities, then we are also talking about the privileged identities, the administrators. Do the administrative identities have unrestricted access? When I say unrestricted access, can they access any of the workloads anytime they want to do any changes? That's on one side with respect to identity. From a device perspective, how are you hardening it? How are you managing your patches? How are you managing the application patches? So when you start doing these two, then you also need to start looking at your logs, right? Monitor your logs, monitor your events. If you see anomaly behavior, are you able to detect it immediately and take remedial actions. Most of the time, right, if it is a ransomware attack, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen on the fly. There are precursors to it, right? So are you able to identify traces of it? So every time there is a notification of a new ransomware, understand what that ransomware is actually attempting to do. How will it penetrate your system? How will it compromise your system? Do a self-assessment internally. That's part of your incident response program. Can you be breached? How do you build controls around your workloads, your identities, your devices, your networks, so that you create a buffer that those don't actually penetrate? Last but not the least, right? Everybody talks about an insurance. But again, that's post-mortem, right? Damage is already done. Data is encrypted or it's even exfiltrated. How sure are you that even if the attacker feels very, very sorry for you and hands over the key back to you, how sure are you the data is not toxic? So I believe firmly on a preventive control than a remedial control. So in order to achieve that, you've got to train your people, continuously train them. You've got to educate your users to do the right thing. So in other words, a cyber hygiene program has to be fully implemented. It's a continuous process. We cannot do a checklist-based training where we do an awareness training today and say, okay, we've done it. No. Can we look at every time there is a new threat, every time there is a new ransomware threat out there, new variant, are we in a position to go back and tell the users, guys, you need to exercise caution. Don't click on things which you are not sure. Ask for help. And last but not the least, where are you keeping your data? All your sensitive data, classified data, should be stored in a central location, and that has to be fortified. When you have data sitting in multiple places, then you have no control over it. So even if one endpoint, let's say one laptop gets encrypted, and that laptop, assuming that it is used by an accountant, then you don't have that data. So you ensure that all data is stored in a central location and it is accounted for. Your backup plans, your disaster recovery plans. Now today, we have state-of-the-art technology. The backup technologies can have intrusion detection. They can detect anomalies. Let's say if there is something which comes into the storage area and it tries to tamper with the data, it can trigger and block, trigger an alert and block the traffic. So we need to start asking ourselves, are we moving with time? Are we upgrading our technology? Of course, there is a cost element, but what is the risk which you're trying to take? Or what is the risk that you're going to treat? And your discussions with the board, with the senior management, should be from a risk perspective. What is the risk you're going to treat? But if you just go and say, hey, I need $100,000 to buy a backup server, they're not going to give that to you. So you need to back your conversation with the regulator's requirement. If you're a banking finance organization, your regulators have given clear directives as to what you need to do. Azad, if you want to add anything to what I just said, please feel free to say it.
Many important things you have told, that prevention, preventive control, and detective control. That's the most important thing. Otherwise, if we think incident response, this is the least thing. Before that, we have to think the preventive control. So everybody should focus, and we have to give the justification. That's the ultimate goal for every security professional.
Absolutely. Any more questions, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? Any questions?
Hi, Sujit, it's Roshan.
Hey, Roshan, good to hear your voice after a long time.
After a long time.
Yes, go ahead. Shoot.
Just a question or maybe an addition on what you have said, like prevention mechanism that you can take rather than going for the forensic and all kind of analysis afterward, like post-mortem thing. having a security operation center or a team within your system, like for monitoring, within your organization is much more appropriate in that case, preventing kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
Comparing that to outsource your security operations center function to a outside party or a say IT service provider,
Mm.
so that they might be providing services to the other organizations as well.
Sure.
So in that case, I mean, obviously both are advantages, but cost-wise and so on, you have to find it out. So in your opinion, what would be better? Maybe cost-wise, obviously having an internal team, or having a security operations center kind of activity outsourced to a third party altogether. So it's just a
Asad,
thing to think
sorry,
about.
sorry,
Yeah,
Roshan,
just
completely. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And that's actually depends case by case. Like for if the organization is small, so for them managing SOC team internally and establishing or SOC security solution internally and looking after 24/7 is really difficult. So in that case, cost-wise, outsourcing is a good decision. But if the big team, big organization, uh, and their sensitivity increase, so for that case, internal SOC team is more helpful, and then trade-wise and dependency to other organization is really helpful to manage internal security team. So in that case, security team internally, although cost is becomes sometimes higher, but confidence wise, dependency wise, it's more viable for large organization. And you can see that all the large organization, majority of the large organization, they manage security operation in their by them. And but for the small organization, they who are more cost sensitive, they outsource. But other case also happen, but there is no same thing, there is no hard and rule for that, whether we should, based on the risks, whatever risks we are taking, if the business owner management decide we have can take that risk for outsourcing, they can do the outsource, no issue. But if they can decide that no, we'll maintain at our premises, we'll keep this risk with us, we'll not outsource, they can do. So any model can work, but usually for large organization they manage by themselves, and for smaller organization they outsource. So if you would like to add anything else.
Yes, Prashant, my response would be one size doesn't fit all, right? So we need to first start looking at what is our requirement. Uh, as Asad mentioned, size does matter. If it is a small organization, can you afford it? Sometimes small organizations may be able to afford a lot of money as well, right? So I wouldn't get into that discussion. I would like to look at, okay, what is that we are trying to achieve in terms of monitoring? Do we have an internal team which has the knowledge, the experience, and the capability to monitor? If they don't have that knowledge and experience, then we have a situation there. So we may tick mark saying, okay, we have a team which does monitoring, but in effect, they are not knowledgeable and experienced to do it. But if you look at an outsourced partner, since they are managing it for multiple customers, you have a resource pool. That's an advantage, but comes at a price. The second one is if you have a team internally, retention also becomes a challenge. Skill shortage is a challenge. But if you go with a third party service provider, they will probably have a pool of resources which will be able to provide us more. I mean, depending on the situation, there will be always a resource which can actually meet our requirement. So that always is a good thing to do, right? Now, in today's context, the subject of security operations has evolved, right? And today we are talking about modernized security operations. In other words, automation. So how much can we automate is a big question. Again, in order to automate, you need the right skill sets for us to, fine tune those engines and automate those areas which should be addressed. Now, for example, if let's say if it is a ransomware trace and if it detects, there is no point
somebody getting involved and trying to figure out whether it is really a ransomware. Block straight away, no argument, no discussion, block. Right. So there are certain parameters we can actually identify, look at the signature, look at the behavior, and block it. But there are areas which require human intervention. So we need to be very clear, where do we automate, where do we need human intervention? And sometimes this human intervention can be in specialists in nature. Right? So the technology which we are talking about today has a lot of capabilities built into it, right? I mean, the ones which are being introduced into organizations has a lot more far superior capabilities. Whether organizations are adopting them is a good question. If they are not, what information can you log and take it to an operations center? That also needs to be looked at. If the device, if the source, the log source is not able to capture specific information which is required for security monitoring, we cannot also have a false perspective saying, okay, we are monitoring, but that device in essence is not giving me the relevant information for you to monitor. Roshan, I can see you wanting to talk. Do you want to add anything to it, Roshan?
Yeah, just addition onto that, and as same as with the Security Operations Center, in some places they wanted to outsource their incident response as well, because they might not be able to have a team within the organization capable of handling incident and technical knowledge and experience and so on.
Absolutely.
So in that case, I see it as I mean, there are positives and negatives in any decision that you make.
Absolutely.
One thing is, like, if it is the internal IT staff and some of them are working as a incident response team, since if it is a, say, their mistake or a fault, which they might have not looked at earlier, they might want to cover it up as well as just not to make it to a management, say, issue. And they, in that case, outsourcing the incident response team kind of activities might be also good, because then the third party would come and have a look at it and find out who is at fault. And I mean, not to punish them, but just to make it a point and make sure that it will not happen again. But at the same time, outside party who is not having the entire visibility or the understanding of the internal network and so on might not be able to respond to an incident in a proper manner. So what's your thought as well as Asad thought on that kind of a scenario? Because I mean, in the banking sector, they might have lots of kind of experience in that kind of a background.
Azad, you go first. Asad, would you want to go first?
Yeah, nothing to add. Already you mentioned lots of things, and already he mentioned this many idea and thoughts. I think that's how it's world is moving, and that's how everybody is managing.
Okay. So, Roshan, to answer your question, right? Definitely, the knowledge has to be exchanged, right? The internal and external team need to be aware of what technologies are being used, what is the architecture being deployed. So even when there is an incident, it has to be a collaborative effort. It cannot be a one-sided effort where one says, okay, you're supposed to do incident handling when the internal party is not cooperating, providing information. One thing I want to highlight, as Roshan, you mentioned a very valid point. Okay, sometimes negligence can also cause a breach, but then when they actually try to remediate or even do an investigation, sometimes those things can be brushed and pushed under the carpet, so they can start hiding things. So if at all we are looking at governance, good governance, which includes segregation of duties, then these roles have to be segregated. So we need to identify who should do what and where the accountability lies. So it is important for the security management, IT management to look at it in total context and establish that governance framework that gives assurance to the stakeholders. Prashant?
Yeah, that's a real the point that you are mentioning. It's a segregation of duties and so on. Make sure that each and every person is responsible for one thing, as well as it will be overlooked and taken care of by some other party as well. So that should be the way to go forward, I guess, in that kind of a scenario. And also uh, outsourcing incident response kind of a thing. I guess one positive point that I was thinking while you are talking is that, of course, they need to provide and give some insight into the systems and what are the things available, and say, I don't know, maybe a patch level of different servers and all kind of thing, depending on the incident, of course. And rather than people who are working with the system trying to do the incident response, a fresh look at the system from a different perspective and angle and a different mindset might help them to find out the incident and remediate that incident as well. So that's also kind of a positive point, that if you consider outsourcing incident response is a good thing or a bad thing, so that's a good thing that can happen, because if you are looking at the server all the time, you think it is perfect, but nothing wrong with it, but some outside will find out some issues with it to remediate it and fix it as well. So that few good points to say, to get into your mind. Yeah.
Exactly. Prashant, I would like to add one more thing, right? I mean, it's also important to conduct periodic audits, right? Azad in his presentation also spoke about red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming exercises, right? And they also uncover a lot of areas for improvement. So when you look at the whole framework, you need to look at the policy making, then in terms of the operations, and then finally, you need to look at in terms of assurance. Now, there is feedback going from each and every activity. And more importantly, for me, for an effective, good incident management program, we need to establish the baselines. If we don't establish the baseline, everything will be an incident. And there'll be a lot of noise which will get created on a day-to-day basis, and the incident handlers will get exhausted. And when you have a very serious critical incident, they may not be able to identify that, even if it is standing in front of them and glaring at them. Right? So that becomes a very serious concern for organizations. So I would reckon that it is important to establish those baselines so that when there is an incident, it is a deviation from the norm, which will prompt them to go and attend to those. Right? If there are any other questions?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have taken a lot of times, and it's
no, not at all. Not at all, Roshan. I'm glad that you asked these questions, and it actually opened up the discussion. So since there is no other questions, and more than that, I think we have completely run out of time. So I want to take this time to thank Azad for taking time to talk to us on incident management. Are we ready for the next breach? And I think there's a lot of points which you shared. It's a good refresher. And I think some of these points which you mentioned triggered the discussions, and we were able to focus on a few areas and ask those questions amongst ourselves, answer those questions as well. But it is important for us to go back to our respective organization and ask the same questions with the same force. Are we ready? What more do we need to do? Because organizations are living and the change is dynamic. So every change which gets initiated in the organization will warrant a change in architecture, change in people, change in processes and procedures. And are we looking at the same way, the incident response and management as well? So with that note, I want to once again thank all of you who took time to join us for this evening session. And more importantly, our guest speaker, Azad, for your time. I also want to extend our greetings to the Dhaka chapter, and I look forward to collaborating with the Dhaka chapter, ISC Square Dhaka chapter, in the future events. And for those of you who are tuned in to the session and who will be listening into our sessions, this session later, we have another event coming up next week. That will be on cybersecurity trends. We're in the middle of the year, July, and it's good time to take stock. So we have Niranjan Disanayake, one of our members, who will be talking to us on what are the current trends, what are the new technologies which are out there, and what should the organizations be doing. So that is one discussion which we are planning next Tuesday, same time, the same place, right? And we are also planning another event which will be on 20th of August, right? And that subject is nothing to do with IT. We are going to be talking about how do we improve ourselves. Now, most of the time, we do come across situations where we feel a little disappointed, or sometimes we feel incapable of doing certain things. And suddenly that element of doubt creeps into our mind. Am I so stupid? Am I so dumb? Am I not capable of doing it? We always get this thought all the time. So I have a very renowned, experienced speaker, Asita Vikramarachchi, who is going to be speaking on this subject, who is actually going to run a workshop. So he'll probably do a few workshops, a few exercises with us to help us overcome those negative thoughts. He calls it the self-talk. So how do we manage and overcome the self-talk? So I invite all of you to join that session, and a special invitation to the Dhaka chapter as well. Right, so with that note, we see you again next week. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody, for your times, and especially thanks ISC Square Colombo chapter for inviting me. And I especially welcome all members of Colombo chapter to attend ISAGA Dhaka chapter, ISC Square Dhaka chapter event. I will send the link accordingly. Thanks for everybody, and thanks Sujit for invitation. Hope to see you in near future. Bye bye.
Sure thing. Okay. Bye bye.